What is up, conscious monkeys? Welcome back to another episode of Traveling to Consciousness. As always, I am your host, Clayton, and in today's podcast episode, we're really diving into understanding how you can find the power within yourself. This episode with Tyler Butler is all about connecting our breath, our body, to our mind, our consciousness, and learning how to upgrade our life using our breath. And this is such a powerful interview, and I'm extremely excited to have Tyler on the podcast. He's someone, excuse me, he's not a cough. That was just a impromptu cough. Tyler is someone who I met when I moved back to Pittsburgh, and one of the most conscious individuals who I've found here. I know there's a lot of you guys out there, and so this is not to take you guys down. This is to tell you how conscious this guy really is. Very in tune with his body, very in tune with awareness, and that's why I'm honored to have him on the podcast. And on top of this is an amazing episode because this is the first podcast that I have recorded and released in the new studio, which is in my basement. And we have 3 cameras. So if you want to see Tyler's beautiful face, if you want to see my beautiful face, go check out the YouTube video because it's pretty good. I think it's cool. I think it's pretty cool. But I tell you all this, with all this being said, let me talk to you about Tyler. Tyler is a father, a husband, a coach, a healer, and above all, a monster. Tyler seeks to unlock and integrate the deepest parts of himself by pushing his limits and finding peace with self-regulation techniques. We're going to talk about those self-regulation techniques when we get into here. We're also going to talk about the Om vibration. We're going to talk about ice baths. We're going to talk about gods and deities. We're going to talk about kids and how he approaches fatherhood, something that I know nothing about. So it's really good to hear his take on it, especially being a conscious individual. So ladies, if you are looking for a man, Tyler is already taken, but it is good at least to attune yourself to a conscious individual, a conscious masculine figure. So definitely use him as a point of reference. Men, if you're looking for what the energy feels like of a conscious individual, also listen to this man right here. So guys, without further delay, I'm taking up too much of your airtime. Without further delay, I introduce you to the great Tyler being Butler.
Traveling to Consciousness, exploring spiritual journeys to find answers in uncertainty.
The great Anubis.
Anubis is the gatekeeper to the underworld.
Yep, god of the underworld.
Yeah.
He is the guy on the boat that
Okay.
picks people. Actually, he might not be the guy on the boat. He's not in too many stories or like hieroglyphs. He only shows up every now and then, but it's always around like mummification, death, those kind of things.
Okay. I'm so fascinated with like mythos anymore. I was as a child, just for the story sense and like, I don't know, the magic of it. And now it's taken a totally different feel where I'm like starting to recognize truth in some of the mythos, and that it's like ancient stories trying to be passed down to us in such a way to like distill wisdom in some way. Like these are some things to pay attention to, but it can be really hard for me still to interpret it well. And I know that there's some real masters out there who have done brilliant interpretations, but it still comes back to the individual. Like I know how it feels like when something connects for me, like almost like that coming back to Jesus moment and realizing that like Jesus isn't this abstract figure who just like got nailed to the cross for your sins, but instead is like a representation of the actual conscience and moral direction that lives inside of you. And it's just like, oh, like just weird reframes that occur as you like grow up, essentially.
The stories take on like a deeper meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of the what was it I was thinking about? Oh, the Greek philosophies, or like the Greek gods, because they would always have gods that they would attribute to different like emotions. And that was like my first like whole epiphany into this, where it was like, oh, it was like they're trying to personify an emotion. I don't know if they actually believe that there's these gods fighting in the world, but it's like these energies actually have control over us as humans.
Yeah, and that that's exactly what like I'm getting to, in that sense of like how it connects. As you get older, you realize that like anger, when anger washes over you, like it it is its own energy, and everyone has anger within them that just takes over them at some point. And like you could attribute, and we're just using this word anger, there could be a variety of words that are much more like nuanced or specific towards that feeling, but that feeling is essentially an energy or an entity that exists in our world. Now it's not this like concrete, I cannot touch it, and yet it is here. And we navigate this space, and we see these emotions, we see these feelings, these ideas come into conflict or come into unison, whatever they are. And we might describe them as a god, if you will. We might describe them as something greater than ourselves, because they can take control of us, and they have definitely taken control of large swaths of people and shaped history as we know it.
Yeah, when you get possessed by an idea.
Yeah.
No shortage of leaders or individuals who have gone through that path. Also, by the way, I'm just thinking of this. If you want to adjust your headphone volume, you can do so with this thing. With this thing right here. Like
Okay.
this will be yours all the way over here, and then this is kind of mine, so I can like increase the sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just so you're
Let me
aware.
just try it.
So you have some editing.
This is just my normal voice speaking right now. This is getting loud. I don't like it that loud. I think I like it right this place right
That's a good
here.
one? Cool.
Yeah, this is good for me.
But also make sure you're kind of like about this far from the mic too.
Okay.
Okay,
Am I
cool.
pretty good right here?
Yeah.
Feel free to call
maybe
me
a little
out.
bit closer. Okay. Just to, because it's real nice and sensitive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get in there. It's gonna get in your personal space a little bit.
I'm gonna get a little intimate with it.
Yeah. It's your mic right now.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Become one with the mic.
All right.
Merge your consciousness with the mic.
Me and you, baby.
Yeah. Isn't it kind of cool?
Yeah.
Kind of just be a little like, oh, like I can get into this.
Hey there.
Yeah.
You're so soft. I wasn't expecting it.
Dude, especially when you hear yourself in your own head.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a weird feeling. Oh, shit, dude. Yeah, man. The whole idea just of gods in general is a very fascinating one. And I always think I feel like I bring it back always to like, it's a hierarchy. Like there's always gods that are higher.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, what are you aiming towards? And I find this, and you were kind of alluding to it there when you started talking about like this emergence of
you can touch my feet with your feet.
Okay, cool.
It's okay.
I got a little nervous.
Yeah, it's okay.
There you go.
We'll find it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, there's a spot somewhere. This is the first one, dude.
Yeah.
We'll get back to the gods in a second, but dude, this is exciting. This is the first like in-house, real setup podcast. I've done 2 before where it was in person, but this is the first one where it feels like, oh, we got 3 cameras, we got 2 mics.
This feels great. I'm so happy to be doing this in person too. It's just I have much better conversations in person. Essentially, like it's okay over Zoom, but I have not been a big fan over the last 3 or 4 years for a variety of reasons. But one of them, just like, it is not the same. It is not the same when you cannot feel someone else's presence that you're talking to.
Yeah, and even I think there's a micro delay. Sometimes I get into delays where it'll be like from like a half second to a second, which is
it's forever.
Huge. But on the corollary, it's been super helpful for me to kind of gauge my listening ability as opposed to interrupting or adding words. It's like, just sit back and listen. Let him go. There's a little bit of pause after they're done talking. There's a little bit of pause.
Yeah. Great reframe.
Yeah.
It is a long time, right? Even just a second, but actually sometimes it's nice just to take a moment.
Let things settle.
Take a breath. And let things penetrate, if you will. Let an idea sink for a second.
Down into that psyche.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what were we talking about with the gods?
Just how different emotions, different ideas have certain hierarchy.
Oh, the material world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's I feel like that's such a bridge that needs to, maybe it doesn't need to get crossed, but it needs to at least be addressed, where you have material scientists who then are like, oh, this is a physical thing. If I can't observe it with my 5 senses, then it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the logical mind implements that, but the way we move throughout this world doesn't exist. Like, we don't act like this is the only physical thing that exists. We act as if there's a dimension, whether that's time, whether that's these, taking hallucinogenics type deal. But we like intuitively act as if there's a bigger picture going on, and it feels like material science just hasn't caught up with that.
Mm-hmm. And I think some people are scratching the surface of it, but yeah, what we like hold as a higher form of truth often in science is what we can measure, what we can quantify. And a lot of the world that we live in, you can't do that. And that doesn't make it any less real or make it any less impactful. Um, we're all dealing and living in a world of emotions and ideas, and some things get way out of hand sometimes that can't be like quantified, if you will, like the mental health decline in our society, and someone like struggling to recognize truth from fiction and the illusions in our head. Like, how do you take a person and show them like something that is true? They won't believe it, because everything is shaped by your perspective. You believe what you choose to believe, and that can't be quantified in a way.
And I think that's probably an antithesis, especially I think of our generation, which I would postulate is probably more empathetic than past generations of recent history. And where this comes into truth is like the idea of objective truth versus subjective truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're seeing that play out on
Mm-hmm.
the political, on the sociological landscape of, the gendered war, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, okay, this is their truth, but at what level does it become this, I need to accept your truth versus it being an ultimate truth that we all can agree upon?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. We have to have a shared reality in order to have a shared society. In order to make civilization work, we have to agree upon certain things. And it seems like certain fundamental aspects of what we all agree upon are being questioned right now. And I don't think people quite realize how detrimental that is. Like, when you start to shake the very bedrock of how we perceive reality, and how even a child, comes equipped to perceive reality, like, that is going to really fuck us up. And yeah, it's like everyone has their truth that they believe, but we need to come to an agreement. We have in the past. It's what like our Constitution is, for example, what our Bill of Rights is. It's like we've come to an agreement. People who really thought about something came to an agreement to say, we need to be able to have difficult speech with one another and be able to have discourse even when it's really uncomfortable. And that is so important for us to arrive at an idea of truth. Because I don't know that there is like, I don't know that we'll ever have this concrete, that's not what truth is. It's not that we will find this thing of truth, but it's like aiming towards truth, aiming towards something that's real. You go outside, you feel the wind, you feel the temperature. That is true. But if you're in your head all the time and you have lost connection with like your intuition, you're starting to believe things just based on what you're hearing, what you're taking in and consuming all the time. And then what is truth to you? You don't even know anymore. And you're now caught in this idea or ideology.
It sounds like even somebody else's truth.
Mm-hmm. And you might not know that. It's difficult. I know pretty much every year that passes, I become more aware of things that I wasn't aware of. And like, sometimes it's just like a lot of shortcomings because I beat myself up all the time. But a lot of times it's very helpful too. It's like, oh man, I can stand up for myself. I can create the world that I want to live in. I can put the work in and change in such a way that I might not have believed I could. I'm not a slave to my genetics, if you will. Everything that I do has an influence on the gene expression. And had I not learned that from experience, had I not opened myself up to reading a variety of things and listening to such a range of people, I might not have like come to that perspective. And I might have imagined my entire life that I am a slave to my genetics. And it's like, that's not helpful. That's not growing. That's just stagnancy. I'm being stuck. And I would live a much poorer life as a result of that and not feel powerful.
Yeah, something that was in there that I feel like I heard you say on the other podcast. Is it Clayton Moves?
Yeah, Clayton Law, but his
Law.
online presence, Clayton Moves.
Okay.
Make Moves.
Make Moves. Okay, is that the podcast? I want to make sure I get it right.
Make Moves podcast.
Make Moves podcast. Yeah, so that the listeners can check out another podcast. Something that you kind of were just answering in that, something that you said in that answer that I picked up from that the one podcast I listened to you, is this idea of awareness isn't like a binary thing. It's not like I am aware or I'm not aware, which is something that I always felt like I was caught in, right? Back in my college days, getting into conspiracy theories and, the evils of the government, I've been like, oh, I'm aware. I'm fucking aware. I know what's going on. You guys don't know what's going on. I know what's going on. But now, as the last probably 5, 6, 7 years have unfolded, there's new layers of awareness that keep unlocking my awareness of my body, of my soul, of, the one source consciousness, God. It's like awareness isn't a binary thing. It's a range. It's a hierarchy, if you will.
Yeah. Patanjali, from like the Yoga Sutras, would say that awareness is this underlying, it's essentially the eye of God. It's the underlying, consciousness isn't the right word because awareness and consciousness are actually different. But it's just there. It's like when you're meditating, for example, and you're like catching yourself thinking, and you're like, oh wait, well, who's catching the thinker? Another thinker. And you keep going like level back, like and catching yourself thinking. And ultimately it arrives at this like, well, wait, who is this witness? What is the observer? And that, I think, is awareness, this underlying presence of something that we can't perceive. And that, I think that is awareness. And so, yeah, it doesn't make sense for it to be a binary thing. And it's just always there. And it's always something that we can expand into to learn more and more. Because, yeah, we have no fucking idea what's going on. And I think the longer that we're here, the more we will realize that we know less than we thought before. And yet, at the same time, paradoxically, we'll know more. And it's like weird to say that out loud, but yeah, I completely agree. Where I thought too, for a time we're like, oh, I know what's happening, like, well, I'm going to take, I know now I need to take ownership of my life and like keep myself in good physical health. And, I'd be reading like trusted sources to keep myself healthy. And you come to find out, years later that like those trusted sources are just controlled by institutions and entities that actually don't give a fuck about your health. And it can really like shake you. It's hard coming into more and more awareness. And I understand why people don't. I understand why a large swath of the population has continued to bury their heads further into the sand, because shit's scary.
It shakes you. Like you were saying earlier, it shakes you to your core.
Yeah.
It shakes your truth to your core. So what, you kind of said it at the beginning of that answer, what is the difference then between awareness and consciousness?
I'm so not like an expert really
what's your opinion?
in anything. I think consciousness is something within us, and awareness is, and like words are tough, right? Because we say like I'm aware of something, and me saying I'm aware of something isn't what I mean by awareness. There's like a capital A awareness that underlies reality, that is the mind of God, if you will. It is the perception of God, which we can tap into. And I think consciousness is the divine spark, if you will, that lives within us at the cellular level, that is keeping us alive and lets us tap into that mind of God. And there's like this mirroring effect where like there's awareness underlying it all, and then there's consciousness and us in this realm, this world, and we can kind of become aware with our consciousness, and we, like, almost like looking at a mirror, use that awareness to see and perceive more and more. And I don't know if that's a great answer, but that's sort of where I'm at right now. And I'm sure that'll evolve in the next year, 5-10 years.
Oh, it's an interesting one. I'm picking it up as consciousness is the tool that we're able to use to penetrate awareness.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah.
It's an interesting way to look at it, because I don't know what the difference is.
Mm-hmm. And that, I think that's really well said too, because that's like, you become more conscious as you grow, you know, and you see people becoming less conscious too sometimes.
With deeper awareness, you become more conscious.
You can tap into more awareness by becoming more conscious, if you will, from the perspective that I just described, at least. But yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, but you can get caught in the nomenclature.
Well, but it's a good, I think it's an important conversation, because the way I see it, and there's many words that are very similar to this, is that if you have two words, they serve two different purposes. We didn't create another word just for funsies. So there has to be a difference between these two that exists, but we're just like slightly missing something about it, or we're just not actively aware of what that thing is.
Yeah.
That's a trippy one, man.
Yeah, words are really interesting. You know, you use things in such like a colloquial manner sometimes, where things are interchangeable, but actually at their core, they are much different. And I have found, at least, I learn much more, and my perspective changes as I dive into like just a word, whether it be like the etymology of a word and trying to figure out where it comes from, like through time, and what the underlying like meanings were of a word. And it can become really revealing, because we really take words for granted in a big way. Like, we really take the fact that we can speak in language, but like right now we're performing magic. Just right in this moment, we're performing magic. I'm creating vibration inside my body that harmonizes into some shape or sound that you are able to receive, understand, and formulate a concept in your mind based on the vibrations that I am currently putting out. That's magic. I'm shaping reality with my words. And so those words are essentially spells.
Yeah.
You know, each word has its own like intention and meaning, and they come together into these like spells where we are capable of coming to an understanding. And that can be beautiful, but it can also be scary, because they can be used against us. Yeah,
and I think that's probably where free will kind of comes into play. But as you were talking there, I kind of brought up consciousness and the etymology of consciousness and awareness, because I feel like this is actually probably a pretty important thing. The first thing I noticed is the trends here, because what we're looking at, guys, are trend lines of how often they were used, and it dates back to 1800. So in 1800, consciousness was pretty low. It peaked around 1880, took a dive until 1940, and now it's been on this surge, just this climb, until 2019. Whereas awareness, it was never used. What are they using to do this? Adapted from books. Oh, so they're pulling all these words from books, it looks like.
Okay, so how much they were used, like through literature or something.
Yeah, bring your mic with you. Yeah. Remember, get intimate with it.
Yeah. Sorry, I move around. I'll leave my hand on you, baby.
But what's awareness? It's like zero in 1800, and then it doesn't start really making it doesn't come alive really until 1900. But then since then, it's been this like steady graph that's increasing through 2019. So let's look at this. So let's start with aware. Middle English aware, from late Old English gruer, which meant watchful or vigilant. From Proto-Germanic garwars. I'm not German. But it has all these different things. And to be wary, to be cautious, to perceive or watch out for. Interesting. So aware is like a little bit more like, okay, be watchful, be vigilant, be proactive.
And so just to like make things so much more confusing, just for funsies real quick, this is also like us looking at an etymology, for this, aware is going back towards Middle English or even Germanic, whereas like awareness is the interpretation, like the word awareness is an interpretation from like a Sanskrit word that goes back thousands of years. And I don't remember off the top like what that Sanskrit word is, but that would almost be what like would be getting into the root of what we were just talking about in terms of awareness much more. Whereas this aware is like the more, maybe a more commonly like you need to be aware of your surroundings because there is danger afoot.
That's a good point.
Versus like awareness of like the senses within you and, around you.
Yeah, so in Sanskrit's the oldest language, right? Oldest living language?
I'm not sure.
Oh, we got a laptop here.
Yeah, there's...
The oldest living language, because they're alive. What is the oldest language? Language is an essential part of human communication. Oh, no kidding. Allowing people to express ideas. Among them, okay, about 7,151 languages are spoken in the world as of 2022.
Wow.
Among them, only 23 languages account for more than half of the world's population. A third of total languages spoken are used and are said to be endangered. It's the 80-20 principle right there for you. The oldest language to be spoken was the Proto-Human language, which is said to be the predecessor to all languages of the world, according to Wordium Daily. It is a hypothetical language. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Susceptible to historical linguistic analysis. Come on, give us something concrete. The Darvidian language has speakers back to the 8th century CE. Whoa. Dead language, first language. The oldest living languages, okay, that are spoken today, according to Mondley. Sanskrit would be the oldest at 3,500 years, with a close second being Greek at 3,400 years. Sanskrit feels like it's older than 3,500 years.
Yeah, I don't know that we really know fucking shit.
That's fair,
to be honest. Like,
all right, well, let's go back to awareness. We're going down a weird rabbit hole. All right, so awareness in Sanskrit's vijnana.
Okay.
The state of level of consciousness where sense data can be confirmed by an observer.
So that's like, to me, that's an important concept real quick, because that's getting us to like first principles, like what is objective reality, to a rational observer, like the state or level of consciousness where sense data can be confirmed by an observer. You and I can both sit here and we can be totally different people with totally different ideas of the world, and yet we can both confirm that there is a table in front of us. Now, we might not both be able to confirm what the vibe in the room is. We're going to have some different perspectives of that. That's subjective, but this awareness, can bring us to a shared reality.
I'm even thinking about it in terms of like working with like a coach or a guru. You'll do that because they can see things that you're not seeing about your life. They can point out little things or issues that are going on. And that's what's this making me think of, is like, you're not aware of those issues, but they're aware because they've either been there, they've gotten past it. So based on their sense data, they're at a higher state or level of consciousness in a specific realm, whether it's business, money, relationships. And so their sense data, the information they're taking in based on your situation, they confirm what that they're observing, and then they relay that back to you. But since you're not aware enough to see that, you can't see it. You're not aware of it. So they're bringing that into your awareness, and then it's up to you if you want to be confirmed to it or if you're agreeant. That's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a beautiful like sales pitch essentially for a coach. And I think the real reason why working with someone, whether it be a therapist or a coach or just having a good friend that will actually speak truth to you, is just paramount to live a good life. because I'm not aware of some things that could make my life better in the way that I maybe am conducting myself. And someone else might be able to relatively quickly see that and help me level up my life in much shorter time frame than I might figure out myself. Because someone can come and they can like work with you for a little while. You know, I work with a lot of people in the movement space, for example, and people just unfortunately move terribly in our current society, mostly because we're wearing shoes that don't fit and such and such. It's just affecting you all the way up the chain. So it's like, it's fucking easy to see now, like the way that people walk and how their ankles collapse and how it's affecting their knees and their back. And it's like, man, if you can open someone's eyes to that and help them feel that within themselves, then they start to have that awareness. And unless they choose to put their head deep back into the sand, they're going to keep that awareness. That's theirs now. They can choose what to do with it. So they can start to wear better footwear, for example, or start to strengthen their feet, their ankles, their knees, their hips, their back. And over a relatively short time frame, like 1 year, they can dramatically improve the way that they feel in their life.
All just by becoming aware
and
having someone to show that data, show them that sense data. All right. So what's interesting about this word is that in the definition is consciousness.
Yeah, right. And that's, it goes, you know.
You know what they say about circular dependencies.
Yeah.
All right, but let's check out what does it mean to be conscious? So it's from 1600. Knowing or privy to is poetic, from Latin conscientious, knowing or aware. Oh my gosh. Oh, we gotta love these circular definitions. Is that your phone?
So sorry.
Bro, party foul, dude. It's alright, I've done it before too. Let's look up the Sanskrit for consciousness. What is the Sanskrit for consciousness? Chaitanya. Chaitanya. Chaitanya? Am I saying that right?
Probably not.
Probably not. I apologize to all my Hindu or Sanskrit speakers out there. Let's look at, let's use the same source. Consciousness. Wait. It's the same word.
Yeah.
Vijnana?
It shouldn't be.
It should not be.
They are different.
Then maybe it is Chaitanya. Let me see if let's use this translator and then go back the opposite direction. Switch it.
I think it could be interesting to almost just search like Patanjali. Consciousness versus awareness.
Patanjali.
Oh, Patanjali. See, I'm fucking that up.
It's all right. I'm pretty sure it's Patanjali. Consciousness versus awareness. But wait, I feel like I want to read this Wikipedia page.
Yeah, for sure. My bad, Patanjali.
No, you're good. That's the thing. That's how you spell it or pronounce it. So Chaitanya in Sanskrit, probably pronouncing it wrong, refers variously to awareness, consciousness, conscious self, intelligence, or pure consciousness. It can also mean energy or enthusiasm. So that doesn't really help much. What about chit? Chit is a Sanskrit word meaning consciousness. It is a core principle in all ancient spiritual traditions originating from the Indian subcontinent, including Hinduism, Sikhism, and Jainism.
And this is where it can become challenging because, you know, we're using English terminology here with consciousness, and yet those two words, chit and I don't remember how to say the other one. Are definitely different and would have different meaning to someone who spoke that language and understood that language.
Right.
You know, it'd be like in the same way that like we say the word snow for any type of snow, but someone who lives in a very cold climate that grows up around different types of snow is going to have a lot of different words for different types of snow, you know, and those matter. And they can influence your survival even.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
I think in the Amazon, I got to look this up, Amazon group, they have like 8 different words for the color green.
Sure, right? Because, you know, it's not just green.
Right. And then what's interesting about this too is it also influences your perception within that environment. Because you're like, oh, it was green.
Words matter. They're shaping your actual perspective.
Yeah, literally shapes your perspective of the world. I had this fascinating conversation that even went into how our calendar and our timing shapes our entire perspective of the world. How we decided, I mean, it was probably, how many years ago would it have been? A couple thousand years ago, when they decided to actually break down the calendar in terms of how frequently we rotated around the sun. Before that, I think it was like the Indians, at least, had this perspective, which is they measured it based on the moon. And so what happened was we actually started breaking down time relative to space that we were covering. So just by doing that, I think it was called like the 1260 frequency, universal frequency, and then there's like another one that we're kind of shifting into. It's a long thing. I need to get this girl on the podcast. I actually just emailed her today. But the point is, though, is that now we're breaking down our perception of time to space. So like we've made this mental connection with space that inherently when we say time, we're talking about the amount of space that it takes us to move around the sun, which completely distorts, well, it doesn't distort it, but it puts us in this like conscious perspective that's like different than just what could be alternative.
Yeah, it creates a filter through which we now live and see that it's difficult then to see outside of that filter. Whereas maybe if we didn't keep track of years, but instead kept track of like moon cycles, months, if you will, we would have a totally different perspective of our lives. Would our lives feel longer? I don't know. I don't know how that filter is changing my perspective because I'm living in it right now. I would need someone almost outside of that filter to come and make me aware of it. But that goes back to like we can't see the night sky very well anymore because most of us live in cities with just enormous light pollution. But like beyond the lunar cycles, beyond the solar cycles, it's like there's this even greater cycle of the way that the constellations move through the heavens, the way that the shapes of the stars, the different stars that are apparent throughout the seasons and across enormous lengths of time change. And humans through history have kept track of that. And it's very significant, actually. There's some really crazy events that line up through time at kind of specific constellation cycles. This great year, if you will. I forget, is it like around 25,000 years measured? The way that we measure years is like this great year where we'll have moved through all of the different like horoscopic constellations.
Looking it up right now.
Yeah, and so like
about 25,800 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's even a crazier thing here with like the Younger Dryas.
Yeah.
And Göbekli Tepe. You're aware of like that finding on the pillar that they have. So for those who don't know, let me take a step back. Göbekli Tepe was found in Turkey, somewhere in the Middle East.
Yeah, Turkey.
And what they found was this monumental structure, kind of structure like a city almost, that was completely buried. So they buried it themselves for whatever reason. We don't know. Here's my hypothesis: is on one of the pillars, they have this astrological alignment of the sky, like where like there's this bird and then the scorpion and all this stuff. I don't know all the specifics, but and where that astrological event would have occurred or been in the sky relative to this was the exact same time as the Younger Dryas. My intuition's telling me is that they knew whenever this cataclysm was going to happen. That's why they filled this thing in, to preserve it for a future generation, to be like, hey, whenever this constellation gets to here in the sky, there's going to be a cataclysm.
Yeah,
maybe you guys should know this in the future. So that's why my opinion, of course, is that they buried it for that reason.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I've been arriving at that too. Like peoples of old have tried to hand down information to future generations to help them survive and to be aware of things that we might not be aware of, because they've recognized at frequent intervals some bad shit has occurred. And yeah, the Younger Dryas is a perfect example of that. All of a sudden you see this like explosion of technology. And Göbekli Tepe is such an interesting example because what we commonly consider history, that's a time when we're supposed to still be basically cavemen. You know, this like greater than 10,000 years ago, you know, we recognize in modern archaeology, like Sumeria as the birthplace of civilization, which is like, what, like 5,000 or 6,000 years ago?
Something like that.
And then just randomly, like almost twice as long ago, there's just this enormous megalithic structure that appears to have been deliberately buried. And it's like, how the fuck did they even make it? How the fuck did they bury it? And how did they know how to do that? And it just like, it indicates such a greater amount of knowledge than we ever could have conceived as possible at that time. And it's just like, oh man, we don't know much. You know, it's very revealing.
Yeah. And I feel like there has to be this level of being able to tap into those higher states of consciousness that we're talking about, where you have access to more information than what we can perceive at this time. Like, I think I was just watching on Ancient Aliens. It was actually just before you got here. We're starting to develop, I guess, like nanobot technology, where like we can put nanobots into our bloodstream, and they're like 250 atoms long. That's how small they are. And then they can like direct them to like heal and to fix stuff, right? And it got to this point where they're like, you know, and their perception shift of it is, oh, well, if we're creating this and we have these biblical figures who are living to be 900 years old, then they must have had nanotech technology. And our perception isn't to think that maybe they had something else. It's to take our current understanding of the world and then mirror it onto theirs. Oh, we're figuring out nanotech. Oh, we're figuring out this new wave of technology. They must have had that too. It's not like, oh, they had a different way of seeing the world. It's not like, oh, they were tapped into a higher level of consciousness where they understood how to slow down their heart rate, how to be more relaxed, how to pull energy from, you know, a greater ether that exists right here between us, but we can't see it. And so I find it so fascinating how it's like, it's kind of that similar thing. It's like, how do we actually know what happened? And then you want to add another layer to it. Language, like we're just saying. The oldest language we just found was 3,500 BC, which would be about 6,000 years ago. The Younger Dryas happened 12,000 years ago. So how do you communicate something to someone in the future and you don't know what language they're going to be using?
Symbols.
That's the only thing you can do.
Yeah. And it seems somewhat rudimentary. You know, we see these like hieroglyphics and such. We're like, oh, they just drew something weird. You know, this very like immature understanding of it. Whereas it's like, oh no, actually symbols hold truth across time. And it's up to us to try to figure out the deeper meanings within them.
That kind of comes back to our meta truth of the things that stay true no matter what our subjective opinion is of them. And just this ever going process to try to find them or preserve them, or because in 10,000 years the stars are going to still be there, hypothetically, assuming, I don't know, there's maybe quite a few assumptions underneath that, but
I think they will be.
It's like the best thing we have.
Yeah, I think this planet will still be here. It'll be just fine. I hope we are too, but, you know, if not, I think in some way, shape, or form, we actually still will just be fine.
Yeah.
My faith almost demands that I believe that, but in a good way, not in like a overbearing way. Just believe in like this underlying goodness. And I'm going to die. I'm going to be in pain. I'm going to suffer, but like, that's okay. This life is so beautiful. Like, it's such a blessing to be able to be here right now.
How did you come to that?
I don't even know. I guess going through a lot of pain, like through my life, and coming out the other side of it, and like things being good. It was such an example of like the cyclical nature of things. Like pain is necessary, suffering is necessary. Now there's a lot of unnecessary suffering. I'm trying to root it out through like Tough Club, for example. But a lot of suffering is just inherent in living, and it is necessary. But that's okay, because unless I shy away from it and curl up into a little ball and demand that daddy protect me, I actually am very powerful and can confront it head on. And in that willingness to take it head on, it becomes less. I transcend it. And then everything just feels so good.
So do you feel like you actively seek out pain and suffering?
Yeah, to a big degree. Not like in a sadistic way, or there's another word. I think it starts with an M. I can't think of it else.
Masochist.
Yeah, not in a masochistic way, but like, yeah. I mean, I push myself hard, when I work out or when I train or um, when I do stuff. Even just like, it seems relatively simple, but even just agreeing to come to a conversation and like, be on this podcast, like there's an element of discomfort to putting yourself out there, putting your words out into the universe that I could very easily just like curl up into a ball and be like, no, I'm busy. Because it's easier maybe to be shy. It's easier to not speak. And so I've been very good as a result of going through a good bit of pain through life at just like recognizing, being aware of when I have that inner resistance and being like, oh, you again. Hey, hey, you. All right, I guess I got to do the thing. Yeah. Um, and that's just led to goodness in my life. Every single time, pretty much. Even some of the most terrifying things, like getting up on a high line. Oh my God, the first time I stood on a high line. A high line, for anyone listening, is like a slack line rigged at a height where the ground is significantly far below you, and you're wearing a harness. Now there are some crazy motherfuckers out there who free solo it. I'm not one of them. I don't need that level in my life, but it's still terrifying to do nonetheless, amongst many other things. But I felt huge resistance to it, and was like, oh fuck, I guess I gotta do this thing.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Like, in going back to shouting out Pittsburgh Tub Club, the fact of doing something that you perceive as being scary, but logically know nothing bad's going to happen to you, whether it's getting into a tub of frozen water or going up on this slack line, X thousand, whatever feet up, but yet you still have a harness where it's like, all these safety measures are in check. You're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there's still this apprehension to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though logically it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find a way to, do you mentally talk yourself through it? What gets you to do that?
Breath. No amount of mental talk has been really helpful. Not that it's, not, everything's so nuanced. Like, of course your mental conversation matters. If you're just convincing yourself not to do something, that matters. But at least at this point, I have a pretty good handle of when I'm feeling some resistance. And so regardless of then the mental chatter in my skull, because typically the mental chatter is supporting the resistance, it can create some convincing arguments. It's like, the first time you sit down in that ice water, it's like if you trust the mental chatter in your skull, you're going to get right out. You're going to hyperventilate, it's going to take your breath away, and your mind is going to convince you that you're in danger because your nervous system is having a big reaction. So instead, you tune back into your breath and you just have faith and you trust in your breath, and putting that faith, putting that trust into an innermost part of yourself, you start to develop this sense of self-efficacy. And so even when things are scary, you can still act. And I think that's what real courage is. That's what I try to embody. That's what I try to give to people, is like, it's easy to be courageous when things are easy, but real courage is when things aren't easy, when they're hard, when you don't have firm ground to stand on, when it's fucking scary to talk about something, and you're deciding, I'm going to do this anyways, and you do it. And maybe that decision isn't at a mental place. Maybe it's not at like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I got this. I'm a confident bad motherfucker. But it's just like, I'm going to dive in anyways. And the person who is in the middle of that dive and the person who's entering that deep water is different than the person who is standing on the edge.
So how do you get to a place where you know that being that person that jumps into the water versus the person who's standing on the edge, how do you know that this thing isn't going to kill you? That this internal resistance that you're feeling is something for you, a challenge for you to conquer, as opposed to a legitimate fear, survival.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I could actually die doing this
Mhm.
reaction.
Yeah. You don't always. There's definitely an element of like you need to get wise. You need to gain some experience in this world. You need to start to trust your intuition on things. There are things you absolutely shouldn't do, right? Like I approach an ice bath, and it's been years of doing it. Each time, fucking nervous. Each time, my mind says, "You don't have to do this right now. Look, no one would even notice." Um, and yet, if I walked up to a lake full of alligators, yeah, I'm going to have a very similar like inner resistance that's like, don't do this. You don't have to do this. I'm going to listen to that one because there's no sense in it because there are real risks. There are things you don't want to do that you're going to be scared of. That protective voice inside of you is trying to serve you. It's a survival mechanism. And so much of like Tub Club is learning to navigate that survival mechanism so that you have a better handle of it and it doesn't control you. But that doesn't mean that you should like dive into the deep end of the pool if you know you can't swim. Like you're not going to learn how to literally swim when you dive into the deep end of the pool. If you have support around you that, is ready to save you, maybe you give it a chance, especially if you're open and willing to like learn on the fly, but you don't go out by yourself and dive into the deep end of the pool when you know you can't swim because you'll die.
And it's almost the analogy or parallel I'm seeing here is like with jumping into a tub of ice. There's almost this level of, and what it sounds like is this level of pushing back that resistance to the best of your ability. So you might not just jump into an ice bath if you've never experienced cold water.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you get a cold shower first.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you only do a 30-second cold shower.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of work your way up to it to realizing, oh, maybe this isn't so bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a exposure therapy in a way.
That's right. Yeah, that's beautifully said too. I mean, that's just like especially when you're like a solo practitioner, if you will, and you're trying to master yourself kind of by yourself, which is great. You should always be exploring, but there are a lot of people who are out here who will help you, and there's a lot of resources available that you can read and learn. But exposure therapy is perfect. That's actually how I got better at cold exposure, because it sucked. The very first one, it was terrifying. And if I didn't have the accountability of people around me, I wouldn't have lasted. Even the first time I ever did it was 50 seconds in like a 50-degree creek. And, that was really hard. And the next time was like 2 minutes in a legit like ice tub. And that was incredibly hard. And I thought that might be the peak of it. But then just like you're saying, you get in, you take a warm shower and you turn it to lukewarm and I can't think my way through this, but I can breathe my way through this. And all of a sudden that lukewarm just is normal. And I turn it a little bit cooler. And I'm just gradually increasing that exposure. And having faith in my breath and my ability to calm down in that exposure. It's like everything that we do. You go to jiu-jitsu, you don't start jiu-jitsu, take one class, not really learn anything in one class, but like, think you know something and think you're a bad motherfucker and like go sign up for a tournament and join ADCC and like, yeah, you're not going to be successful in that way. That's not productively diving into the deep end. That's not how you're going to grow as a person, but exposure over time, you start to change and that change takes time, but you for sure change. You're always changing. You're always transforming.
Yeah, I think I just saw an Alan Watts quote. It was something to the effect, almost like a corollary to what you're saying, which was like, let me look it up because I just tweeted it.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure I get it right because tweeter.
Yeah. That's such a good point though, just to circle back real quick.
Do it.
Learning to trust your intuition or really learning to listen to your intuition is so important to live a good life. Because if you don't have a good understanding of like what's actually a threat and what's not a threat, or something that you can overcome, then you're just going to live in a state of fear, and you're susceptible to control. And I think we're seeing that in a big way across society. You know, and if more people, if more individuals would get a better handle of like that inner voice and being able to better navigate decision points, we would live in a much, much better world. And what that is at like what that's called at a physiological standpoint is your ability to regulate yourself, self-regulation. And so you've probably heard of like dysregulated systems, you know, dysregulated nervous systems, dysregulated immune systems. And it's like, what that is to me is someone not having a good handle, not having that self-efficacy, not having that trust and faith in themselves to be able to navigate a stressful or some type of circumstance that they're encountering, and instead just cowering back, you know, and choosing not to listen and keeping their perspective limited. Because it can be terrifying to open yourself up, and terrifying to confront suffering head on, and terrifying to come to grips with the enormous like power that lives within you. Again, it can be very scary. And you're going to go through some dark moments as you discover more about yourself in that way.
And even the underlying message there that it sounds like is a fear of being wrong, a fear of thinking that, oh, I was wrong at this point, now I'm not wrong. And it kind of relates to the Alan Watts quote I was talking about, which is, you're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. There's a lot of fear that I've seen, and especially when you're like in a certain group, friend group or whatnot, to go outside that group think. You identify with something, whether it's a political party, whether it's an affiliation of some sort, whether it's even just like with friends, and people say stuff and then you disagree with it, but you don't speak your truth from it. You just agree with it. And then over time you start realizing and seeing the error in it. But for you to admit that there was an error means that you had to be wrong at one point. That's difficult to do.
It's very difficult to do. You basically are sacrificing a part of yourself, something that you've attached to yourself. So it kills me about the push for like self-identity. Like you see it all through colleges right now too, and just kind of all through society, this like identifying as something. It's like, who the fuck are you to say what you identify as? Like your identity is based on how other people perceive you, essentially. And for you to say what you identify as is not reality. Crap, I had... Oh, no. Even more so than just your friend group, though, I have a great concern about just our digital landscapes. I noticed this with, like, younger generations, you know, coming up and, like, having a digital identity, and then not having the strength to become different than something that maybe they said digitally, you know, like I'm a gangster, or I'm a whatever supporter, or I'm a such and such, and you've put this online, you've made it like concrete in a weird way, like digitally concrete.
It's not going away.
Yeah, it's not going away. It's there. And then to go against who you were is terrifying, you know, and it's like, well, what do I even stand for then? Or, you know, whatever the thoughts come up, like you see these ridiculous pictures of yourself from, you know, 10 years ago. Imagine if you still felt compelled to identify with the things that mattered to you like 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
There's an element of this that goes even deeper. In Conscious Monkeys, if you know anything, you know that we're going deeper. This was the end of part 1. In part 2, like I said, we're going deeper. I tell you about my identity shifting in regards to Instagram. We talk about clear, conscious communication, and we even dive into the power of humming. There's also some references of Autobiography of a Yogi and Paramahansa Yogananda. We get into a little bit of sexual talk, talking about circumcision and its effects, and so much more great stuff. in part 2, The Power of Humming and Conscious Communication.